Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker. It's time to revolutionize your health with Revero. Struggling with type 2 diabetes, obesity, or autoimmune conditions? Revero offers a revolutionary approach to treating chronic disease with personalized low-carb nutrition plans, remote biomarker monitoring, and 24/7 access to expert medical providers and coaches. Revero helps you to address the root cause of your health concerns. Be part of the future of healthcare. Join the waiting list today at Revero.com. and take the first step towards lasting wellness.
So I thought it was going to be a 30-day experiment. I thought, how bad could it be? Let's give it a go. And here I am 10 years later. I started to realize, though, that how lucky I was that I went in there for a few pounds of weight loss, because all of these other symptoms that I had been dealing with, thinking they were just normal signs of aging, started to fall away. So things like joint pain, migraine headaches, anxiety, depression, interstitial cystitis pain, and, pain of lipedema. Carnivore diet can be most helpful. It is the most anti-inflammatory for women with lipedema. So it's very helpful. When you're competing at high level and you're fat fueled, like the carnivores are, you have this unlimited amount of energy to work through during the competition. You don't get extra points for doing grass finished for everything. You just don't. It's like you can do so well on grain finished meat.
Okay. Anyway, welcome. We have Linda with us today. She's going to share, I believe, a success story. So Linda, first of all, if you don't mind sharing, where in the world are you? What part of the world are you in, if you don't mind sharing that?
I'm in North Carolina now. I come originally from New York, so you may hear that in my accent, but I'm in North Carolina now for the last 20 years.
Okay, wonderful. North Carolina's got a lot of trees. A wonderful place. So
it's beautiful.
Furniture country. I know. All right.
That's
Well,
right.
tell us a little bit about just share a little bit about your background.
Yeah. All right. My name is Linda Salant, also known as the Carnitarian on Instagram. That's where you'll find me most. I started doing a carnivore diet way back in 2015. It was like April 2015. So I've been at it for now. It's going to be 10 years come April. So it's wild. It's been a very long time. So as far as people saying oh, it's not sustainable, it's sustainable.
So let me just ask, because 10 years ago, because I've only been doing it for 8 years. So you've been doing it longer than I have. And where did you get exposed to that? Were you like the zero in health folks, or where did that come from?
Yeah,
Okay.
It was. So zeroing in on health is where I found it. I had been doing keto before then for a while. I learned about keto way back in my college days. Right after college, I started doing an Atkins diet. I stuck with that for a while. And then I'd had 2 kids. And I said to myself, the best I ever felt was when I was doing the Atkins induction portion. And so I said, all right, I'm going to go back to a ketogenic diet. When I started looking into the Facebook groups now and online forums and stuff, that's where I ran across the zeroing in on health, and people like Kelly Hogan, Charlene Anderson, they were all in there talking about it. And so I thought it was going to be a 30-day experiment. I thought, how bad could it be? Kelly seems to be doing really well. Charlene looks great. Let's give it a go. And here I am 10 years later. So it has grown. The community has grown since then. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. God, I bet I would, without exaggeration, several 100,000 people are now doing this, maybe even 1 million at this point. It's gotten to be quite popular. And I don't know that Charles, when I interviewed Charles years ago, would have ever realized the expanse that would have taken on. And thankfully, guys like him and obviously the people you mentioned, Kelly and Charlene and many others, Amber O'Hearn and some of those other folks, I don't know they would have ever expected this to go so far. And when I saw it, as a physician, I was like, this could be powerful. This could be very powerful. And it turns out that it is. So for sure. So why? What drove you to do it? Just to lose weight, or was there some other issues going on? What was the deal?
To be completely honest, I say it all the time. It was just I was looking to lose a few pounds from baby weight. I had the 2 kids and I was like, let's lose a few pounds. I had so many symptoms, though, that I thought were just inevitable symptoms of aging. And so when I did that 30 days, after I was a month in, I was 2 months in, I started to realize, though, that how lucky I was that I went in there for a few pounds of weight loss, because all of these other symptoms that I had been dealing with, thinking they were just normal signs of aging, started to fall away. So things like joint pain, migraine headaches, anxiety, depression, interstitial cystitis pain, and pain of lipedema, these things started to fall away. And I was like, there's no way I'm going back now. Even if there's weight gain, these things are so worth keeping to a meat-based carnivore diet. So that's what sort of held me there. But to be honest with you, it was really like, I need to lose a few pounds. I need to go ketogenic. And then it was just the promise of the lowered inflammation that would come with just a carnivore diet that sort of intrigued me. And I said, let's just see what happens. And at this point, obviously, I'm not going back. It's kept me here because to go back to those things, to say, I've done the experiment where I've reintroduced vegetables or I've done holiday meals, and I always just feel worse after that. I don't think fiber and I are ever going to be friends again. It doesn't sit well in my gut. Obviously, we don't digest fiber. And so for me, there's just no point in it. And then the inflammation that comes from eating high oxalate, which you can get in a keto diet, which I had been doing with things like almond flour and lots of spinach. I'm so happy that's gone that, yeah, I'm just going to stick with a meat-based carnivore thing. There's just no reason to include vegetables, right?
I never liked them, so it's not a hard thing for me. I mean, I was always, when I was eating a lot of vegetables, like when I was on a ketogenic diet, it was the days where that was being proudly proclaimed. No, there's nothing wrong with keto. Look at all the vegetables we're eating. Everybody's eating giant spinach salads and all this stuff, and of course, ketoizing those. But at the same time, we're like, oh, it's all the vegetables, and so I forced them down, but I never enjoyed them. And in retrospect, it probably gave me a lot of gut issues that I later discovered. It just went away when I went carnivore. And it's interesting. Obviously, as someone who's been in this now almost 10 years, you've seen the evolution, some of the side tracks people have taken on it, and you see some of the stuff. One of the things, as I was exposed to it, and I obviously ended up writing the book, The Carnivore Diet, I was very much influenced by the sort of the belief systems of people that had done this already for 10, 20 years, the Andersons and the Bear, and all these people that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and plus, and they had certain beliefs around stuff and keeping it very simple. And then we now have a lot of extra input in there. You got to eat all these organ meats. You got to take all these organ meat supplements. Now you have to include fruit and honey. And what are your thoughts on some of those sort of detours that people have taken?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the trends come and the trends go. And some of them pop their heads back up for a few months before they get back down. But yeah, for me, introducing things back like fruits, what the people will call like the low toxin vegetables or the low toxin carbohydrates out there, I think it's got to be like on a case by case basis. Some people do okay with the addition of things like fruit and honey, and they claim that they feel better with it. So that's fine. Do that. If you tolerate that well, if you're not experiencing gut issues, if you're not experiencing joint pain from any kind of oxalate overload, like, okay, that's fine. It's not carnivore, but you can still be meat-based. And so definition of, is that a carnivore diet? I don't really think so. I wouldn't call it carnivore. I'd call it like meat-based. Also, I found that there have been trends that have come and gone with things like you've got to slam all the fat. You've got to have the super high fat carnivore diet in order for it to be carnivore. And if you are leaning into protein, you're doing carnivore wrong. And I've found that's the opposite of that has been true for me. And I think that there have been a lot of people who have gone all in on carnivore and then started to not feel really great. And they think that it is because they're eating so much meat that they're not feeling great. But sometimes it's just the fact that you've pulled away the fiber that you were relying on to go to the bathroom, or that you've pulled away on this high oxalate, either keto or standard American diet, and now you're experiencing dumping symptoms that can be problematic. Another thing is that people may be experiencing electrolyte issues once they start to pull back on carbohydrate and sugars, processed foods. And so they start losing weight, they start flushing electrolytes, and then they blame the carnivore diet for making them feel so badly. And so sometimes I think people need to just stay the course, adjust for those things, and they'll get through it. But then other times, I think people do see success with some of the trends of adding in a little honey. If that makes a meat-based diet more sustainable for you, have at it.
Yeah, certainly fair enough. Now, you'd mentioned in your introduction you'd had issues like lipedema. And so this is something that's becoming more known for some people. We have this disproportionate fat deposition, often affects women, often affects the lower extremities. I was just scrolling through your Instagram while you were chatting. I just went and followed you there. And you look pretty darn thin and in shape. Did that resolve that issue for you?
No, it is way better. It's way better. Lipedema is something that you just manage. It's just a condition. I don't like to ruminate in it and say, I've been handed this lot in life. And I've been fighting it tooth and nail. But the lipedema symptoms are what can be mitigated. The propensity for lipedema just is in the people who have it. And so you've got this sort of ability to store more fat than a typical person would, and you have an inability to access those fat stores like a typical person would. And it's due to different things like there's fibrosis there, there's proliferation of stem cells there, there's this just genetic predisposition to storing what you eat as fat and then not releasing it. A lot of people will say, all you need to do to release fat is get your insulin low. And that is the key. It just opens up the floodgates, to your fat cells. But for people with lipedema, that's just not necessarily the case. So keeping to a carnivore diet has helped me so much. I've absolutely reduced, the bruising, the edema, and the pain and the volume that comes with lipedema. You can see, if I were to show you pictures, DEXA scans, and some of this is online, you can see the fat mass in my hips, my thighs has decreased significantly, but still there is this disproportion between my waist, my chest, and my hips. And so I work at it. A higher protein approach, like I said, for carnivore has been working for me. And then obviously I'm dancing, I'm competing. And so that helps to keep me in shape. But it's something that you just are consistently managing. Things like rebounding, manual lymphatic drainage, and massage, these things can also help. Carnivore has been just incredible. And I think that the lipedema community is finally catching on, because I see in the lipedema forums, people have talked about keto in the past, and they've talked about anti-inflammatory diets in the past. But just like you said, in recent times, this year or two, people are starting to recognize that a carnivore diet can be most helpful. It is the most anti-inflammatory for women with lipedema. So it's very helpful.
Yeah, I've actually done a number of interviews with some of those groups in the past, over the last few years. You said you felt like you were aging, and some of these issues were just aging. Do you mind sharing, how old are you?
I just turned 49.
Wow, you look great. Yeah, good
Thank
for you.
you.
Thank you. Awesome.
I had a birthday just a couple days ago, actually.
So you spent your 40s going carnivore. It's like me. I just prior to turning 50, I became carnivore, and I'm about to turn 58 in about 3.5 weeks.
Awesome.
So let me ask you about so you said you're competing, and you mentioned, are you competing in dancing, or what are you competing
I
in?
am. I'm a competitive ballroom dancer. I compete up to 3 or 4 times a year at regional, national events. I just finished up a big event in Ohio called the Ohio Star Ball. Did really well there. And yeah, so I train 3 times a week. I'm in the ballroom studio. It's dance sport. It's not social dancing. Like, it is intense. And it's a great full body workout, keeps me active. And it's just incredible, because when you're doing this, like when you're competing at high level and you're fat fueled, like the carnivores are, you have this like unlimited amount of energy to work through during the competition. I see other people, they get off the dance floor and they're racing for a chocolate bar or a granola something or other, or a banana. And I'm like, no, I'm good. It's just incredible. So yeah, it keeps me in shape. I love it.
I'll relay a funny story. When I was in college at University of Texas, I took one PE class because I had to, and I was already an athlete. I didn't really need it, but I took ballroom dancing, believe it or not. And I remember that. Yeah, it was funny. It was funny. It was because it was me, and I'm a big guy. I'm like 6'5", and it was all these little bitty Asian girls that were in there. And it was just hilarious because I have these kind of long legs. Right. Sometimes I just want to pick them up and go, because it was just like, that was a fun class. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
That dancing can be a lot of fun. I haven't done it in, many years. Maybe I should get back to that one day.
Oh yeah.
What do you eat? What do you eat in a day? What's it look like for you?
Oh, it's interesting. So I do a protein coffee in the morning. I love that. It gets me going. And
What is that? What is a protein coffee?
Protein coffee is, I use like a beef-based, you use Equip protein. So it's a beef-based protein powder. I put a scoop of that in my coffee, a couple drops of MCT, some electrolytes go in there, and I'm on my way. So I'm typically then going dancing. And I find that having that bit of protein, I used to do this completely fasted, just with black coffee, but I found that my blood sugar was dropping on the way to my dance studio. And then I would have some really high spikes during my training session, which was just gluconeogenesis coming through, which is fine. But I found that when I added the protein before I went to go train, my blood glucose stayed way more stable. So I've been keeping with that for a couple of years. So that's very typical. I do that every morning. And then lunch varies. Like sometimes it's steak, sometimes it's ground beef, but typically it's, I'd say probably about 3/4 pounds of whatever kind of meat that I'm having that day. What I really go heavy on though, every day is non-fat Greek yogurt. I love it. And a lot of people don't agree with having anything that is low fat or non-fat. But for me, it's just been a really great way to add in a bunch of protein without getting in excess fat calories that for me end up getting stored in the legs or stored in the hips. And so I moderate my fat content by including the whole cuts of meat, which are typically somewhere in the range of 50, 60, 70% meat, fat to protein ratios. And then the yogurt keeps the protein high and gets the fat down low. And then for dinner, something similar, steaks, chops, ground beef, if I'm not making a chili or meatballs or something like that.
Yeah, there's a requisite amount of fat you need because you're not consuming really significant carbohydrates. So you need that for energy. But then you can get into a situation where you overconsume that. And although there are people that do very well on a high-fat carnivore, I'll be the first one to concede that, for various issues. I see personally as a physician, people with central nervous system disorders, depression, mood disorders, dementia, Parkinson's, MS, things like that. For whatever reason, I think the reasons are, we can think about what the reasons there are. So when it comes to, here's the other thing a lot of people will ask me about. I get this question all the time. How do I do this diet? How do I afford grass-finished meat? And I often tell people it's probably not necessary. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I agree with you completely, 100%. I think I heard you say, at one point, there's no JV team for carnivore. Like you don't get extra points for doing grass finished for everything. You just don't. It's like you can do so well on grain finished meat. And the point of the omega ratio that people point out to me is just ludicrous. It's insane because the amount of extra omega-3s that are in grass-finished meat are negligible when you're looking at absolute amounts. So to say that grass-finished meat is better for you because it has a better omega-3 ratio is like saying you have double the amount of money that I have. You have 2 pennies and I have 1. Like, who cares? We're not finding our omegas in beef. If you want omegas, head to the fish. Just a forkful of salmon is going to more than make up for the amount of omega-3s that you would be getting by switching from grain finished to grass finished beef. So that's where I stand on that. In addition, it kills me to see people sourcing meat from places like Australia and New Zealand when they're consuming it in the United States. They think somehow that because it's grass finished, it's better for them and it's better for the environment. Flying that meat over from another country is absolutely not better for the environment. And like I said, it's not better for you. The nutrition is essentially the same. And I like to support American ranchers. I think it's really important to understand that if we don't buy our meat domestically, if it's not produced domestically, we're going to lose those ranchers. Like we're losing ranchers daily. And I think there's going to be a big wake-up call for people when we've lost them and then we don't have the beef supply that we used to have, especially for the carnivores. And that's what we're living on. We need that beef. I think it's important for people to understand, please don't go overseas to source your meat. America, if you're in the US, please do buy American beef. I have no stake in the American beef industry. I love our ranchers. They're the ones doing the hard work for us. And we really do rely on them as carnivores.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just did a podcast with the RCAF folks, the cow calf
Mm,
producers organization, and we talked a lot about this stuff. And you mentioned the omega-6 index or ratio that you can do. And a friend of mine, Sylvia Tabor, who's one of the founders of Carnivore Snacks, which this is a wonderful product. It's a little expensive, but it's a great product. She did an little experiment where she did the exact same thing. She got omega-3 index. She did a month of grain finished, a month of grass finished, and then she added some fish. And the difference between grain and grass finish was almost negligible. But as soon as she had a little one piece of fish in her week, it skyrocketed that omega-3 ratio. So
yeah.
you're absolutely right that it's minimal difference when it comes to absolute amount. So it doesn't really make a big deal of difference. So you'd mentioned beef. Obviously, my diet is, 98% beef or something like that. Do you eat a lot of other cuts of meat? Do you eat a lot of chicken, pork, things like that?
I've recently cut back on pork a little bit. It's not my favorite, but I do eat a lot of chicken and I love lamb. So, yeah, I include everything. There's a lot of seafood in my diet too, like shrimp and then the tinned seafood like tuna. I love and salmon. I love smoked salmon is a huge thing. So, I often eat that. So, there's this huge variety of meats that I eat for sure. I've done things like elk and bison here and there, but mainly the mainstay and what I feel best with is beef, lamb being second, bison third, but chicken for convenience. Chicken wings are absolutely delicious. So I love making those. Chicken thighs are absolutely delicious. I think that, like you said, there is a certain amount of fat that you have to get. And if you are only eating a carnivore diet, you've got to get your energy from somewhere. And if you were to lean into things like lean chicken and pork, frequently you end up short on fat. And so beef is great because it's just got a great balance. No matter what cut you're getting, you're typically going to have a great fat to protein ratio unless you're consistently eating filet mignon. That's the only one I would say is you're going to have to add some fat to that. But yeah, I do a huge variety. Bacon is definitely in the mix. So as far as pork, but I have cut back on things like pork loin, which I used to eat a lot of because I just feel like it was becoming a little too lean.
Okay. And Karen asked a question about eggs. Are you an egg eater?
Yeah, I am an egg eater. I have eggs most days. Not, I wouldn't say most days, probably like 5 days a week. I'm having eggs. They're delicious. It's everything you need in a perfect little package. And I think some people are sensitive to eggs. There's an intolerance or an allergy there. And at that point, sure, eliminate, reduce the eggs if you're getting inflammation from eggs. But otherwise, it's fantastic nutrition. It's got everything you need. I absolutely include them. I just made one of my favorite recipes is from Maria Emmerich. She does these carnivore bagels where it's literally beef and chicken and eggs blended up with salt and baking powder. And you bake them in the shape of a bagel. It's fantastic. And it's great. They're so versatile. You can do so many things. Then you can try to recreate things that you miss by using eggs. They're really helpful in baking.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker. It's time to revolutionize your health with Revero. Struggling with type 2 diabetes, obesity, or autoimmune conditions? Revero offers a revolutionary approach to treating chronic disease with personalized low-carb nutrition plans, remote biomarker monitoring, and 24/7 access to expert medical providers and coaches. Revero helps you to address the root cause of your health concerns. Be part of the future of healthcare. Join the waiting list today at Revero.com and take the first step towards lasting wellness. Yeah, just to your point about the filet being super lean. I just got back from Ecuador last week, and we spent a week on a boat, and they were so kind. They brought beef for us every day, but it's a fancy boat, and so they give us filet every night in addition to whatever else they were cooking. And by the time I got off that boat, I was so ready for some fat. It was like, give me a damn. So I went and had a picanha because I was so hungry for some fat. But you mentioned one of the things was baby weight. So obviously you got kiddos. And so have your kiddos been subjected to your carnivore lifestyle? Do they eat the bagels? I don't know if they're still in the house or not. But
Are they doing it? My daughter is currently 20. So she was not raised in a house where I was eating carnivore. So this transition for her, she was like, this is crazy. She's not into it. She can do keto. She can do low carb, but she has never been interested in going carnivore. My son has always known me as carnivore mom and I just eat meat. So he is far more willing to sit down to a plate of just meat. And like we did that last night, like we just had sausage last night and that was it. And there was nothing else on the plate. And he's absolutely fine with that. What's hard is, and I see this sometimes online, is when people who are carnivore say, yeah, my kids are going to absolutely be carnivore, or I'll never let my kids have such and such. They'll never eat this garbage food. I find either they don't have kids or their kids are not yet in the school system. That is where things start to go downhill for people, because with the best intentions, I always would say, yeah, my kids are going to always eat healthy. But then when you send them to school or you send them to sports and they get those snacks there, that's where they're introduced to these foods. And it is very hard to then say, you can't eat those like all of your friends are eating them. So what I teach in my house to my son, my daughter's at college, but what I teach in my house to my son is that protein is the most important thing. He's not at the point where I can explain fat grams, protein grams. So we just talk about protein foods. And so generally I say protein's the main thing. Meat is the main source of nutrition for you. And this is what we need to focus on. And then we talk about things like artificial colors, artificial flavors, and added sugars. So we keep those out of the house, but he still has things like crackers. He does have grains. He does have pasta. As a kid, I don't want to say he's more able to handle it, because I think what happens is people assume kids can just burn it all off. And that's when, kids get into trouble. But he's not yet got any metabolic disease. He seems like he's tolerating it all. And we understand that he's got in his head now the fact that there are some foods out there that are poison for you. Anything that's bright red, you just shouldn't eat it. It's not food. And so I think these are the base lessons that I try and teach now, so that when he's older, he understands what real food is and what real food is not. And if he continues on the path that we've set up, he'll end up with, I would say, a low carbohydrate, meat-based diet, which should set him up for health in the long run.
Yeah, it sounds pretty reasonable approach. My kids are not too dissimilar. My kids are a little bit 18, 16, 14, 12 right now. They're perfectly two years apart. And like my daughter, for instance, she's a track athlete. And it was one of those things where she weighs about 100, and I think she's about 135-ish, 140-ish, maybe. She's about 5'9", pretty tall kid. And I said, let's see about how do you get a gram of protein a day? And we go to the grocery store and said, plan a meal. Just go through and look through the things that'll get you the protein. And she quickly realizes that it's a hell of a lot easier if you include a lot of meat and stuff in there. So that's something that kind of teaches them. As soon as my kids could read, I started teaching them about, hey, they want a snack in the store, go find how much sugar's on the back of the label. And we would have those sort of discussions so they understand that nutrition does play a role in their well-being, their health, their mood, how they feel, all that type of stuff. And then ultimately you can say, how do you want to grow up as you get into adulthood? Because that's where we lay our adulthood patterns down in adolescence. We become what we do in adolescence is often what we end up doing for the rest of our life. So it's important to steer them in the right direction if you can. So as far as, okay, so let me ask you, so you're 49, you've been doing this for almost a decade, coming up on your 10th year. Do you have any concerns around cardiovascular disease? Because that's one of obviously the thing that always comes up, all that saturated fat, maybe your cholesterol is elevated. I don't know your situation. Have you assessed that, or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, to answer your question, I have no concerns about it. I have done a full body scan where they check your, what is it, like an arterial calcium. So you get that CAC score. It was an absolute zero. So I have no calcium there. My cholesterol is happily elevated. I'm proud to say I'm pretty pleased with it, actually. So I've got the numbers here. If anyone is interested, my total cholesterol is 312. My LDL is a fantastic 207. And so people would normally freak out about that, be anything, I think it's like above 150 where people start to freak out and they want you to go on a statin. My triglycerides are super low at 60 and with a high HDL of 97. So no, I'm not concerned at all. I feel like my numbers are all in a good place. And cardiovascularly, like I'm in great shape. I, like you, can basically do sprints for an hour. And I don't feel like at all that I've gone down in health since I've started this 10 years ago. It's only been gains since I started. So no, people were very skeptical when I started, and they said, Linda, you're killing yourself. You're going to end up with all sorts of health problems. And they would say, well, your cholesterol is going up. This is no good. This is no good. And I said, don't you worry about it. And then ultimately the media catches up, and we're starting to understand that cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern. And people are starting to understand which ratios actually matter when you come back with your lab results in hand, like what you should be looking at. And that having high cholesterol is actually very preventive. The LDL being high has that inverse association with all-cause mortality. And so when a doctor would say to me, maybe you should go on a statin, I would say, maybe not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I think people are catching on to that now.
Yeah, just for further clarification. So your cholesterol's been high pretty much the whole entire 10 years. Is that fair to say to you?
I would say it's definitely gone up. Like my total cholesterol has gone up a little bit, but honestly, I couldn't remember if it was.
And how long into this journey did you have that calcium score? Was it recently? Or
it was recently. I'd say it was about 3 years ago. Yeah.
So you had about 7 years of high cholesterol in the carnivore and still zero calcium. That's encouraging. Granted, you're still relatively young when it comes to that. So it's one of those things, because the lipidologists, the cardiologists, their heads are exploding right now when they're listening to this. They're like, oh my gosh, she's putting out misinformation. And just wait till you turn 90. You're going to have heart disease. That's always, it takes decades for this to accumulate. At some point, you have to concede that it's not accumulated. So you've got obviously a social media channel, like Carnitarian over on Instagram, and I don't know if you have other platforms that you utilize. Do you get much in the way of negative blowback or any of that stuff? Because I know I have over the years. I just laugh at it mostly because it's entertaining. But what's been your experience?
What's interesting is people are very respectful on Instagram. And so that's where I have stayed. I ventured into TikTok a little bit. They're not as nice on TikTok. They're very quick to jump down your throat and tell you that you're an idiot. And the same on YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel where I discuss with guests a lot of controversial issues, and I do get a lot of blowback on there that I'm, spewing misinformation and that things are going to catch up with me and that my guests are wrong and we're all wrong. But on Instagram, people generally are very respectful and you attract your crew. So it's been good. It's been fine. I think that the more people taunt the vegans, the more blowback they get, and the more how extreme you present yourself on Instagram, you get back in balance that level of extreme blowback. And so I don't, like, not to call anybody out, but I don't eat sticks of butter on Instagram. I don't do things that would trigger people to say that's absolutely uncalled for and you're spewing misinformation. So I keep a very moderate, relatively serious profile, and people are pretty respectful of that. So I'm lucky in that respect.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of the things that I remember when I first started getting some level of notoriety and was being covered in some of the media. It was always negative in a way. It's always just like these crazy people. But one thing that you really like to focus on were these people that were like eating a bunch of raw organs, Liver King and some of these other folks, where it was very easy to parody those folks because it was always portrayed the carnivore diet as raw testicles and brains, and you become like a zombie. Did you notice that? And because obviously at a period of time for many years, Zeroing in Health was a very small, kind of no one knew about them group that didn't have much attention. There's a few, I think Kelly had a little bit of a coverage, I think Kelly Hogan, but for the most part, it was somewhat insular. Now that it's blown up, the sort of perception about what carnivore is very much not reality in my view. Did that frustrate you at all?
It's very frustrating. Just to mention, like, the whole situation with Liver King and that whole persona of that you have to eat so much liver and that you're this wild person. And then somebody like Paul Saladino, for example, in his carnivore book, and people were looking to him as the guide for how to do it. And there was, like you said, a lot of raw organ meats, very extreme, very clickbaitable stuff that influencers like that become so popular, and people do get, like, they get hooked in by those like triggering visuals, and they start to think that we're a bunch of clowns, that this is a very unserious diet and it's insane and we're eating raw steaks. I remember there was an episode of The Doctors where, like, the Armstrong sisters at the time who were doing carnivore, they were painted as like these vampire girls who were just eating raw meat. And it's no, the zeroing in on health community, like you said, the basis of this with people like the Bear and Charles Washington, like, organs were never discussed. Like, it was just not necessary. It was not involved. There were no raw testicles to be seen. Nobody was doing anything extreme. It was really just eating the proper human diet, an anti-inflammatory diet where plant foods were excluded, and there was no requisite addition of those offcuts of meat. I think if I enjoy liver, I'll have pate every now and then. I do liver capsules. I take 2 of those a day just for the B12, not too many, but I do that. But the carnivore diet is just not as clownish as people make it out to be. Like you said, the community has grown so much. It's getting all of this attention, and outlets like Daily Mail, they love the clickbait of the weirdo carnivore. And that's not us. It's just, I don't think, representative of the people in my carnivore community. We're just a bunch of people trying to avoid toxic ingredients and trying to avoid ultra processed foods. And we're not a bunch of crazies eating anything that humankind has not had for a millennia. It's really just normal food. We are not all that strange. And we're performing pretty well in life. If you were to take a random sampling of the carnivore community and the standard American community, I think you'd see that our mental health is a lot better than the mental health of the standard American community. So I don't think we're the bunch of crazies that they paint us out to be.
Yeah, fair enough. I would be willing to take that bet that if we were to sample an average general population versus carnivore, you'd probably see improved health in people who have done carnivore for a certain period of time, for sure. Do you find so we have a lot of, I'm trying to think I'm going to ask here. We have a lot of people that you mentioned the Paul Saladino thing. When I was starting carnivore, he approached me to find out about it. And he was insisting that we've got to match the RDA. The only way you can do it is by all these organ meats. And I said, Paul, I don't think that's necessary, because of the fact that people have been doing this for a long time and they don't seem to need this. But because a lot of times as physicians, you think better or you think you're smarter than everybody else. And I always laugh. I always say that I came to carnivore despite my education as a physician, because it's so it almost hampers you, because you've had this bias pushing you this one direction, and you have to really be able to open your mind up to go the other way. So that's something that I just noticed from the beginning. And a lot of people get angry. What about the raw meat stuff? This is another thing that always makes me laugh a little bit. There's people out there that'll call me an idiot because I don't eat raw meat. And I'm like, I don't like it that much. What are your thoughts on the raw meat stuff?
Yeah, I think that we are absolutely carnivores, right? Our stomach acid can handle raw meat. I don't think that we've got any issue with, as long as you're sourcing well. If you want to eat your meat raw, like, fine, eat your meat raw. If you want to say, I eat it raw because it's got the maximum amount of nutrients that are still left there, bioavailable, because none of them have been cooked, come on. You're not losing that much by just giving it a sear, right? And then it makes it a little bit easier to exist in society when you're not eating your meats all raw, right? You can go to a restaurant and just ask for something that's rare and exist more happily with the people at your table. So I think that it's absolutely not necessary to eat meat raw, but I think if you love it, like I love tartare, I love carpaccio, they're fantastic. And sushi is also fantastic. As long as you're sourcing your meat, I think that our stomachs can absolutely handle the raw meat and there's no issue with it. I'm not necessarily scared of raw meat, but then there are people who do those 200 days of raw meat, or I'm going to eat nothing but raw meat for a year just to prove a point or to get some clicks. And that's just not actual real life. I don't know any carnivores that are doing that don't have social media accounts that benefit from them doing that.
That's a very good way to look at that. And I certainly, if there's carpaccio on the menu, I'm getting it. I'm not a big fan of tartare just because they always throw onions in there, and I hate onions. And so I'll get a tartare, and I certainly don't disagree with you. You can certainly digest raw meat. The problem is there are some people that have gotten sick. Amber O'Hearn would be a perfect example of that. She got really sick off of some raw meat, and it jacked her stomach up for actually several years. But for the most part, I think I don't think it happens very often at all. I think most people are okay with that. But I think your point that, the people that are doing this, like I saw a guy who was like the raw chicken guy. He was going to eat chicken raw every day for, I don't know what happened to the guy. Probably because people got bored of him. He just probably turned in a social media account, and now he's eating something different. Or there was a documentary that was made by, it was Vice, the media outlet called Vice. It came to my house. We did an interview. They also interviewed a guy who's calling himself the Testicle King. And he has a little social media account. All he does is eat raw testicles. And I'm like, this is stupid. Don't lump me in with that guy. But that's really what you get. I think that's a really good way to say that is outside of having a social media account, they would never do this stuff, most likely. Right. I mean, it's very unusual that people would do that. Do you know Kelly Hogan personally? You're in North Carolina. She's in North Carolina. Have you met her?
I
do.
Her? Yes, she's fantastic. We've become good friends in the last few years. I love Kelly. She's fantastic. She's so inspirational, so motivational. I don't know anybody who doesn't love Kelly.
Yeah, she's really, I got to meet her for the first time in Tennessee last year. In fact, I'm going to Tennessee again this year for that. What do they call it? Meat stock, I think, or something like that. Meat stock.
I'll see you there.
Yeah, we'll be there. I think it's in May or something like that. So, and I'm trying to plan my calendar for next year, and this year I'm trying not to go as much traveling. I did a lot of traveling last year, just in 2024, and it was just too much. So I'm gonna have to dial it back a little bit. What else? What other things would you like to share? We've got about another 10, 15 minutes left in here. What else? Any other things you want to share that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that we haven't discussed much, which a personal point for me, is interstitial cystitis. And so if there's anybody out there who's suffering from interstitial cystitis, the carnivore diet has been amazing for me for that. So what that is, chronic bladder pain. It feels like a UTI, constant. So there's this low grade of pain that is like existing all the time. And then you get what's known as an IC flare, where then you're in like extreme pain, which feels like a very serious urinary tract infection. But it isn't caused necessarily by bacteria in the urinary tract. It's caused by inflammation of the bladder, which comes from oxalate. And so people need to understand two things: that a carnivore diet can help with interstitial cystitis, but that a carnivore diet can also lead to symptoms of interstitial cystitis while you're dumping oxalate. So if that is something that you're dealing with as a carnivore, there are steps you can take to mitigate the dumping symptoms, and that would be introduction of a little bit of oxalate. I just did an interview with Sally Norton where we talked about that and utilizing a little bit of oxalate daily to just keep those symptoms at bay. But the interstitial cystitis community is desperate for solutions to the pain because it is so painful. It's so debilitating. It keeps you in bed all day, and there's no relief. There's no medications for it that work. So getting the carnivore diet out into the world, into the interstitial cystitis community, I think would be fantastic. So I just want to mention that because it's important for people to understand that there is this great solution to interstitial cystitis, and it is lowering oxalate, which a carnivore diet does.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked with Sally many times on some of these issues. We are seeing more and more research coming out on carnivore. David Ludwig did this study from Harvard a while ago. Cleo Protegero, Frederick Lois, and others did another study, and now we're seeing all these case reports. So we've got inflammatory bowel disease, we've got anorexia, we've got anxiety, depression. We have coming up very shortly a study on MS, which will be coming out. Are you excited about these studies getting in the mainstream? Or, because a lot of people are like, I don't need a study. It doesn't going to change me. But do you see that as being a net benefit to the carnivore movement?
I think so. Any information is good information, right? I just feel like there's not going to be anything but good news when the study results come out as far as the difference between standard diet and carnivore diet. When people like Chris Palmer are looking towards ketogenic diets, carnivore diets to do things like help with mental health, it's very important. It can change the conversation dramatically to let people know that their health conditions are not necessarily a lack of medication. This is something that I really do believe strongly in and I live by, is that I will not age into the person who has 6 medications in their medicine cabinet. And this is the path for so many people. When studies like this come out, it allows doctors to prescribe better nutrition for people rather than prescribing medications to people. The polypharmacy that goes on, because you start with one medication, which leads to a side effect, which leads you to then have to take a second medication to take care of those side effects, and on it goes, is so typical. This is so typical in the US, and it is really such a shame. And I think it's contributing to a lot of the metabolic dysfunction that we see in people, is just the quantity of medications that they're on. The side effects can be very drastic. Like they can have life-changing consequences and sometimes worse than the disease that you're trying to treat. So I'm excited about it. I think what's very important for the up and coming generation, like you mentioned IBD and IBS, which one you mentioned, but studies on fiber and the relative unimportance of fiber and the benefit to reducing or eliminating fiber, I think would be fantastic to see, because so many people out there are harming themselves with adding in so much fiber, and the sicker they get, the more fiber they need, the worse off they are. I think that's a really important one, because when you try to increase fiber, you are then increasing plant toxins, oxalate, phytates, lectins, and all the goitrogens, everything that comes with plant food, because you're trying to increase fiber so much. And we've got this generation, I see it amongst my daughter's friends, where there's all these teenage girls with IBS, that there's even a slogan, hot girls have IBS is the slogan. And it's just crazy to me that this entire generation of teenage girls thinks that it's normal to have IBS. And then they just keep shoveling in more plant foods. It's not normal to have IBS. So I think it's very important. Yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I was on Ben Greenfield's podcast yesterday and doing a debate with a guy named Joel Green, who wrote the Immunity Code. A nice guy, agrees with me, but his sort of thought is it's a temporary thing, carnivore, and then you're going to run into long-term problems if you don't reintroduce things like fiber. That's not been my experience, obviously not your experience. Have you noticed that you've had to change much over the years? Have you had what you started with? Is it the same thing you've been doing for the whole 10 years? Or have you had to figure some more things out?
I've been very consistent in terms of the amount of plant foods I eat. It's like next to nothing, right? So I include spices, and I always have. So I haven't changed that. The only thing that I've changed has been the fat percentage of my foods, because I find that I can maintain more leanness. I was able to switch from a higher fat carnivore approach to a lower fat approach, and then I saw more muscle gain, better body composition, percentage-wise, less fat and more muscle, more bone density by switching to a higher protein approach. But no, I've not had to add back in any fiber. I've absolutely not had to add back in nothing like that. I sleep really well. I go to the bathroom very normally. There's just been nothing that I've had to say, carnivore was great, but I've got to do this. What I have added in is hormone replacement therapy, because like I said, I just closed my age, and that's something that you just can't get around. Hormonal decline happens as you age, and a carnivore diet is not going to change that. So for me, adding back in some hormone replacement has been fantastic. So I did change that. Other than that, no, I'm staying the course with a very standard, what you'd call a zero-carb carnivore diet, what they talked about in Zeroing In on Health, where the focus is not on the micronutrients, it's not on the organ meats, it's just on eating meat. And if you spice it, cool. If you don't, cool. If you like salt, fine. You don't, fine. And there's not that focus on getting all the minutia that people get wrapped up in. You're just focused on, hey, everybody, let's just eat meat and be healthy. And as you are on this carnivore journey, you can figure out, like I did, what percentages work better for you. And there's tons of little tweaks that you can make. Like I said about oxalates, some people find that if they add back in a little bit of blueberry, they do better because it mitigates the dumping symptoms. Fine. Some people find that they use an electrolyte packet every day and that helps them feel better. Fine. So little tweaks here and there, but I haven't had to make any radical changes. I'm not dipping into sweet potatoes. Avocados are not back on the table or anything like that. I haven't found that I need any addition of fiber.
Yeah, very good. I don't disagree. I think keeping it simple. I don't think nutrition should be that hard. I think we're the only species on the planet that labors our thought about this stuff. Every other animal just goes out and eats what they're supposed to eat. And you can argue that obviously meat's a complete food. You can live for indefinitely on it. You've shown that 10 years, essentially. I've got just about 8 years under my belt. So anyway, Linda, Carnitarian, share again your social media handles, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I'm the Carnitarian on Instagram, and you can find me on YouTube at the Carnitarian Life. And if you go to the Carnitarian Presents, that's my line of spices, which is like a line of spices that I make for meat lovers. They make meal planning really easy. So you can find that online. And I'm on Facebook at the Carnitarian. That's basically where I hang out. But Instagram's the best place to find me.
All right, Linda, thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite. Thanks for having me on.